The future is now. Bringing you my week 13 rest of season rankings, but starting it off with the running backs. We started off with Saquon Barkley, Bijan Robinson, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Christian McCaffrey, and Devon Achane rest of season. I think we all know why Saquon Barkley is the RB1. He's the RB1 in fantasy points per game. We love the matchups coming down the line. It doesn't even matter though, because Saquon Barkley has just been that overall dude. We look at Bijan Robinson, and Bijan Robinson has been the RB6 in fantasy points per game up to this point this season, but going forward, Bijan Robinson has really started to turn it up over the last 6 games. Now, it wasn't the most ideal setup in week 11 versus Denver. Denver is a pretty rough defense. We got the Chargers, Minnesota, Vegas, Giants, Washington down the stretch. Absolutely love where Bijan Robinson is sitting. Joe Mixon is the RB2 in fantasy football in points per game. Love the matchups coming down the line. He's getting the volume, been absolutely electric. Got to feel very good about where we have Joe Mixon in our rest of season rankings. Now, debating Joe Mixon versus Derrick Henry, I think is something that is easily debatable. I have these guys so close in this little own mini tier. There's been a little bit of negative regression for Derrick Henry over the last few weeks, but we do know when this offense is absolutely cooking, Derrick Henry is at his finest. CMC, this may be more projection than anything else, but put up 7.8 versus Green Bay wasn't ideal, but hopefully with getting Brock Purdy back these next few weeks versus Buffalo versus Chicago, very good matchups to get CMC back on track. And then of course, Devon with Tua coming back has looked absolutely electric. So we look at our A tier, and when I said Tua coming back, meaning Tua since he has been back, because I know some of you are going to critique that comment down below. But then Jahmyr Gibbs been an absolute league winner, and I think debating Jahmyr Gibbs versus Devon was something that I was 100% doing in my mind. Chase Brown, Kyron Williams, Alvin Kamara, Breece Hall, and Josh Jacobs. I think the person that I want to hit on and talk about in this overall tier, in the A tier for running backs, is going to be Chase Brown with a little bit rougher of a schedule going up against Pittsburgh Steelers this week in week 13 and going forward, but the volume's been absolutely electric. So you got to have Chase Brown here in the A tier. And then talking through Breece Hall, the biggest issue for me with Breece Hall is going to be going down the stretch. Is Aaron Rodgers going to be playing for the New York Jets? Are they going to put him on IR as they get out of playoff contention? Some great matchups like week 14 versus Miami, week 17 versus Buffalo to kind of get you to the championship, even into the early part of the playoffs. But 31 fantasy points versus Indy. If he can kind of continue that streak going forward, I think we're going to be pretty excited about that value. In this tier, a lot of questions, like there's the Josh Jacobs who's getting the volume. We got Jahmyr Gibbs, who what's those snap shares going to be looking like if what we saw him do on Sunday Night Fantasy Football. We're talking about Jahmyr Gibbs should probably be an S tier. Overall, let me know what you think of this A tier down below. We move on to the B tier, and we got Kenneth Walker, Jonathan Taylor, James Conner, Dave Montgomery, Tyrone Tracy, and Tony Pollard. And yes, I pushed Tony Pollard all the way up my rankings. I think Tony Pollard is getting the volume, and I know we bounced back against the Texans pretty heavily after a few weeks of struggle, but going up against Washington in week 13, Jacksonville in week 14, 2 good matchups back to back. We'll have to see how Tony Pollard's going to be able to perform. Will Levis has been absolutely cooking for the Tennessee Titans, at least being able to move the chains, which is enough for a guy like Tony Pollard to be having some value. Tyrone Tracy, can Tommy DeVito, the Italian god, actually do anything to help Tommy DeVito's overall numbers? James Cook, David Montgomery's been getting the work as, the secondary piece, but both him and Jahmyr Gibbs have been looking absolutely good on the overall running back front. So like I said, rest of season rankings, as we're projecting this out, a lot of it is my opinion. So if you have something that you're like, Caleb, I can't agree with this, would love to know your thoughts down below. And just don't tell me you disagree, because we all get the comment, hey, I disagree with blank. Now, let me know why you disagree and back it up with some facts, because I would love to hear your thought process. Helps us all become better fantasy football players. Next guy is going to be the C tiers of running backs. It's going to be James Conner. It's going to be Aaron Jones, Bucky Irving. Shout out to Bucky Irving for pretty much just overtaking. It looked like the whole season he was going to be overtaking Rachaad White, but he finally fully did this last week. J.K. Dobbins, Chuba Hubbard, who got that contract extension. Bryce Young hasn't been the worst thing for Chuba Hubbard's overall value going into the rest of the season. Now, Chuba Hubbard, when we're looking Tampa Bay, Philadelphia, Dallas, not maybe the greatest matchups, and then rounding out with Brian Robinson there in the C tier. Now, D tier of running backs, we got DeAndre Swift, who I thought DeAndre Swift was going to be a lot more of a league winner than he's actually been this season. That's kind of on me on this overall value for DeAndre Swift. Rachaad White, Rico Dowdle, Isaiah Pacheco, Ramondre Stevenson, and then Najee Harris to round out this D tier. And just like E tier here, we got Kareem Hunt, we got Jalen Warren, Nick Chubb, Javonte Williams, Tank Bigsby, and then Travis Etienne to round out my overall E tier of running backs. And when we look here in the F tier, the one thing that I want to talk about is the difference that I have between Isaiah Pacheco and Kareem Hunt. Like right now, I did have Isaiah Pacheco in the D tier ahead of Kareem Hunt. That's just based on the fact that we think Isaiah Pacheco is going to step back in, but it's a little bit hard for me to know what these overall splits are going to look like both between Kareem Hunt and Isaiah Pacheco, because I think they both could have some type of value. Now, before we get to the wide receivers, I just wanted to say I have to pack so much stuff for this freaking trip. So if I'm going a little bit faster than usual, it's because I got a lot of stuff happening in the personal life as we're in Thanksgiving week. But I appreciate each and every one of y'all for tuning in, answering every start sit question down below. We are on the way to 5,000 subscribers. So if you haven't hit that subscribe button, hit that subscribe button. It helps me out so much. S tier of wide receivers, Jamar Chase, everyone's clear. Wide receiver one, leading the wide receivers in points per game. Have to feel good about him rest of season. I don't care if the Bengals, my precious Bengals, make the playoffs. As long as Jamar Chase and Joe Burrow are cooking, great things are going to happen for my Jamar Chase shares. Justin Jefferson is the clear wide receiver 2 for me, even though it was a little bit of a down week in week 12. Amon-Ra St. Brown, AJ Brown, Nico Collins. I'm excited to see Nico Collins going forward. We still see Nico Collins being a top 6 wide receiver in points per game. I think that's going to continue to climb as he gets back to full health. And then Puka Nacua for the overall Rams here in the S tier. Move on to the A tier. And like I said, I had Cooper Kupp and Puka Nacua back to back. I think both are continuing to cook with Matty Boy Stafford. Can Cooper Kupp remain healthy? That's kind of going to be the main question for me going down the stretch. Drizzy Drake London, he hauled in 61 yards before the bye week. So can he continue to have those big receptions, those big points per game days? George Pickens, like I said, I think debating here George Pickens versus Mike Evans. I was debating him in the week 13 wide receiver rankings. I think we could make the case that Mike Evans maybe should be going ahead of George Pickens rest of the season. But like I said, it's super close when we were kind of sitting here in this tier. Terry McLaurin, who had the big touchdown catch from Jane Daniels that should have sent it to overtime. And then Tyreek Hill, who maybe I'm being biased on my Tyreek Hill hype rest of season, but I do like the schedule coming down the stretch. And I only think as this offense for the Miami Dolphins continues to spread the ball around, because that's how they're trying to win fantasy football. They're trying to win football games. They're not trying to win fantasy games. I talked to my boy Notorious Fantasy over on his channel. He's a huge Miami Dolphins fan. His perspective is that they tried to just force feed Tyreek. It wasn't winning them football games. So now they're trying to work the ball around, but hopefully that ball ends up coming back to Tyreek Hill. The B tier, we got Malik Neighbors, Garrett Wilson, JSN, who's on the full breakout potential, CeeDee Lamb, Zay Flowers, and then T. Higgins, who's the wide receiver 6 in points per game right now. Absolutely continuing to see T. Higgins continue to light it up. I think there should be maybe a case made that T. Higgins is higher up in my rankings. CeeDee Lamb with no Dak Prescott, I understand, but he's still getting the target share. We got to put him here. For as lead of wide receiver he is, even though it's not an ideal situation at all, Zay Flowers has put all the rest to bed with Deontay Johnson. We move over to the C tier, and we got Cortland Sutton. Shout out to Cortland Sutton making a full 2-tier jump up my rankings. A lot of y'all called me out on the Cortland Sutton ranking last week. Don't worry, I fixed it. We went in, we looked at the rest of season averages, we looked at the current averages, and boom, bada boom, what do you know? Cortland Sutton leading off here in the C tier. Jawan Jennings doesn't have the graphic with the name on it, but Jawan Jennings I do have as the clear wide receiver 1 going forward for the 49ers. Lad McConkey, Marvin Harrison Jr., DK Metcalf, and then Jaden Reed. And Jaden Reed's honestly one where his being just an average wide receiver 2 has kind of hurt him, but I do think he still has that boom potential week in and week out that he had to kind of make it here in the C tier. Move on to the D tier, and then we got Khalil Shakir, Darnell Mooney, Deebo Samuel, Devontae Smith, Jamison Williams, Devontae Adams, and Calvin Ridley. And this point in the wide receiver rankings, this point in the season, it's just not looking good for the elite level wide receivers, like a guy like a Devontae Adams or like a guy like a Deebo. And so really the whole wide receiver landscape on a points per game, it just hasn't been as efficient as it has in past years. So if you drafted early running back, you're feeling so good about your teams. So that's why if we do have these arguments that you guys are going to be having on Caleb, I'd much prefer this wide receiver over this wide receiver. I understand, but sometimes it's just so minute that I don't think it's actually going to be hurting or losing you fantasy football games. We're talking directly in these tiers. Now, if we have large tier gaps, we would love to discuss that. So let me know down below. We move on to the E tier. Brian Thomas. I wish we got Trevor Lawrence back, but Brian Thomas is just going to be Brian Thomas. Josh Downs with Anthony Richardson is going to be just who he is. DJ Moore is making a push up the rankings. I think there's a case to be made that DJ Moore should be leading off this tier, but since it's rest of season and we're baking into what's already happened with what's going to happen, I think it's hard because we have seen the floor be super low for DJ Moore. Tank Dell, DeAndre Hopkins, Jacoby Myers, and then Jordan Addison sliding into the E tier. Moving on to the F tier, Jalen Waddle has made a push up back up the rest of season rankings for the wide receivers. Amari Cooper, if he can get fully healthy and kind of put himself as that number 1 wide receiver for the Buffalo Bills. I know Khalil Shakir has essentially been that this season, but I do think Amari Cooper, they do need a true X, a true alpha on the outside. Keenan Allen had a huge week in week 13 going forward. Like we said, how much can we project DJ Moore and Keenan Allen on a week-to-week basis? Those are the big question marks. We got the two Browns wide receivers between Jerry Jeudy and Cedric Tillman. I think you might make the argument that I should put Jerry Jeudy ahead of Cedric Tillman based on past performance. I understand all that. Michael Pittman Jr. and then Rome Odunze. We move on to the S tier of quarterbacks, and we got Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Jalen Hurts, Jaden Daniels. If you have any one of these top 4 economic code quarterback upside quarterbacks, we talked about this all season. Got to feel really great about it. I think Jaden Daniels, after this last week performance, it made the push of debating him versus Jalen Hurts. It definitely was more of a discussion this week than it has in past weeks, but still having Jaden Daniels sliding in as my QB4 rest of the season. Joe Burrow's been absolutely cooking. Like I said, I don't care if they're making the playoffs or not. The Bengals are not making the playoffs, not because of Joe Burrow, not because of Jamar Chase. This defense for the Bengals is absolutely atrocious. I'll get off my soapbox on the Bengals, but Kyler Murray is the next guy in that wide receiver front. I think the big thing we need to understand with Kyler Murray is he passed up Brock Purdy because of that Brock Purdy injury rest of season, but it was not a great performance for Kyler in week 12 fantasy football. We move on to the A tier for quarterbacks, and this is where this tier used to feel a lot better for me than it does now, but I did push Baker into the A tier, and I know for some of you, it's not going to be enough. 18 fantasy points without throwing a touchdown in week 12. A lot of this, like we said, is the rest of the season projection, but I think you could make the case between Brock Purdy, Justin Herbert, Bo Nix, and Baker on your preference, and then there's kind of that mini tier within the A tier with Patrick Mahomes and Jordan Love. Even though Patrick Mahomes had one of his better weeks of fantasy football in week 12, like I said, the inconsistencies of Patrick Mahomes, they just been able to rely on that running attack, which has really gotten the volume of not only the rushing attempts for Patrick Mahomes, but also the passing touchdowns way lower than it has been in previous years. But Justin Herbert, I know the passing attempts have been low, but that overall rushing floor has really helped solidify his value here in the A tier. We move on to the B tier, and yes, I did push Jared Goff down my rankings this week, not because I think Jared Goff is a terrible quarterback, but I just think because of the way that they're going to be able to continue to run the ball. Jared Goff, shout out to the Lions for having the best record that the Lions have ever had in my lifetime, and a lot of your lifetimes, been absolutely elite what Dan Campbell has been able to do for them. We got Anthony Richardson, Konami Code quarterback, coming up. We know the floor, we know the ceiling. Sometimes it's high, sometimes it's low. That's all you're going to be getting with Anthony Richardson. CJ Stroud is making a fallen down into the B tier. He was like at the back end of the A tier last week. I think CJ Stroud, just it's been a sad year for him for fantasy football, and I think you could maybe debate Drake May versus Matthew Stafford over CJ Stroud rest of season in our rankings. And we just move on tier to our last and final tier, to the C tier. Russell Wilson, Geno Smith, Tua, Kirk, Caleb, Aaron Rodgers. Maybe we could have pushed Caleb over Kirk, maybe over Tua. That's something that if you guys want to really debate me with that in the comments, I still have Caleb Williams cemented here in the C tier. Now, we just went through quarterbacks, wide receivers, and running backs. We are heading to each and everyone's favorite tight end landscape, which has been absolutely brutal this season. Brock Bowers is putting up the best rookie tight end season of any of our lifetimes. He's like a glorified elite level, rookie level wide receiver, and he's even sometimes better than that. Brock Bowers, easily S tier league winner if you do have him. We then have Travis Kelce, Trey McBride, George Kittle, and then Cade Otton. Yes, made an appearance here in the S tier this week. We then move on to the A tier, and we got David Njoku leading off to A tier. Then our man, Jonnu Smith, who is absolutely pacing the Miami Dolphins in targets right now, even beating out our guy like a Tyreek Hill. Absolutely electric. He's kind of been the number one receiving option. TJ Hawkinson, Evan Ingram, and then Taysom Hill in the A tier. If you do not have an A tier or a better tight end, even if you do have one of these A tier tight ends, like if you have Taysom Hill, if you have TJ Hawkinson, you might not be feeling good on a week-to-week basis. You hopefully have one of those S tier tight ends. But I will say Jonnu Smith is kind of making a push for that S tier. We'll move on to the B tier. It's going to be a Mark Andrews. It's going to be a Tucker Kraft, Kyle Pitts, Sam Laporta, Hunter Henry. We know the week in and week out values of these guys can be pretty hit or miss, but this is kind of how I have the B tier. And in the C tier, I realized I forgot to add Zach Ertz's overall value here. He was supposed to be leading off the C tier. So if you see this graphic and someone comments down below and you say, I do not see Zach Ertz, it's because you didn't listen. You probably just skipped through, which is fine. But Zach Ertz would be leading off my C tier here. Dallas Goedert, Dalton Kincaid, Cole Kmet, Pat Freiermuth, Jake Ferguson to wrap up my overall rest of season rank. So like I said, I appreciate you guys trying to help you win not only your league, but helping you win this week. So if you haven't already, hit that like and subscribe button. Check out these two videos if you haven't. We put out our running back and wide receiver rankings videos this week. We haven't done that in a while. This is going to be my last video for the week. We're not putting out a stash video. So if you have any stash waiver wire questions, feel free to ask me down below. Appreciate you guys. Hopefully you had a great Thanksgiving. Hopefully you're shopping today with Black Friday. Hopefully you're thinking of me. And potentially, you leave me a really nice comment down below saying why you're thankful for. I'm just kidding. I won't make you do that, but I'm thankful for each and every one of you. If you didn't tune into Wednesday's video. But appreciate you guys. Hope you had a good Thanksgiving with your friends and family. Check out these 2 videos if you haven't. I'll catch you on the next one. Peace.